Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Chapter 12 concludes with the following guidance. It establishes the truth that Brahman alone is truth and true knowledge, and it can be achieved either through the process of inquiry or through the process of yoga. Therefore, Acharya proceeds to say the following. Starting from life breath to wealth, everything is subservient to Brahman. The sun is dearer than wealth. The body is dearer than sun. Sensory organs are dearer than the body. Life is dearer than the sensory organ. And above all, Atma is supremely dear more than even life. This is the hierarchy which is made known and clear to all of us. And Vedanta classifies therefore broadly every jiva into two categories, the knower of the truth and the ignorant. The knower of the truth will always say Brahman is a witness and is dearer than anything else which is known or seen. Whereas the ignorant will say sun, wealth, power, status, acquisitions, name, fame, all these things which is dear to him as an output or ingredients or the essentials of Atma. Now Vedanta proceeds to the next step. As far as knower of a truth is concerned, he is already there and therefore we should leave him out. It classifies the ignorant into two categories. One who becomes an earnest disciple, an earnest disciple, and the other who becomes a disputant and wants to argue. Now, when both actually are in the platform of ignorance only, so how does an emancipated soul guide both of them? See, the guidance can't be prejudice. It can't be one-sided. It can't be loaded heavily in favor of somebody. It has to be the same. So Vedanta chooses this path. It addresses both the earnest disciple and the disputant, saying, what is dear to you will make you weep. And it stops. And Vedanta says, for an earnest disciple, this will induce, tempt, and attract him towards inquiry. He will think, what is that we wanted? We wanted a son. When it is not born, we weep. After birth, if the child is not healthy or deformed, we weep. If the child is healthy and it doesn't show signs of intelligence, we weep. If it shows signs of intelligence but becomes arrogant, we weep. In spite of being very good, if it ultimately lands up without any income or a job, we weep. Then we think of that person, son getting married, his children, it's endless. So he decides that in our Jivitam, we may require all this, but we need to be indifferent. And we need to inquire about our own self. And that alone will make us stop from weeping. Now come to the disputant. He is after all quite dogged and he's after all quite persistent, that what he loves, what he considers dear, is the truth. But what happens to him finally? He or she finally lands up in weeping. Therefore, it is a single statement common to both who are on the platform of ignorance, earnest disciple and a disputant. And one learns out of it and starts moving towards the path of knowledge, while the other, because of his adamance, stays where he or she is and ultimately end up weeping. This is the truth of life. So when this is said so, objectionists raise one point. See, your message is loud and clear, because we also realize this is going to happen to an ignorant person, and those who do not follow will land up weeping. It looks very, very clear and apparent. Then when this is picked up with the mind, why not we get salvation? Why doesn't it happen immediately? After all, we know the truth, we accept it's the truth. See, the world order is you accept something, then we leave it there. You gain that whatever you want on acceptance. So we accept this is truth. So why don't we become emancipated souls? For which Vedanta replies, no, it's not easy. Understanding does not result in realization. Understanding is a great step, but it's not the only step. One necessarily has to pursue the path. That's why these 4 yogas are again and again repeated in all the text and brought out in a understandable dimensions for a commoner like all of us through the Bhagavad Gita. Bhakti and karma, performing it in a selfless way, will cleanse our mind and prepare and strengthen our mind and prepare us into this path of self-knowledge. And yoga and jnana will alone get us the salvation and nothing else. And therefore, one has to either go through the process of inquiry, engage in the process of inquiry and start discarding neti, this is not real, this is not real. And ultimately will end up in realizing that Brahman alone is real and the truth. Or engage into yoga. Through the process of meditation, concentration, samadhi, one will also attain the same Brahmanhood. Therefore, this is something which has to be done by any one of the two. And it also says very clearly that, how do you say, one more time, it reaffirms that Brahmanhood alone is truth. For the simple reason, we are able to smell through our nose, we are able to taste through our tongue, we are able to hear through our ears and see things through our eyes. But nose cannot smell and eyes cannot taste. They have their limitation. Merely because nose cannot smell, can we come to a conclusion there is no smell at all? There is no, the element of smell is absent in this world? We can't say so. Therefore, what is the connecting organ which connects all? We'll say it is the mind. But mind is unstable and fickle. So, who is the witness to the mind? It's not the buddhi. It has to be something else which you have been all along been talking about. And therefore, this is the process of inquiry, which will ultimately lead us to the conclusion that Brahman alone is truth. Therefore, chapter 12 evidently brings out how ordinary day-to-day happenings can trigger our thoughts towards Brahmanhood. Let's hear chapter 13 from tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We saw so far through chapters 11 and 12 Brahman, experience of Brahman during the dream state, then waking state, and also in our ordinary life. Through chapter 13, Acharya tries to guide us as to how there is no difference between Brahman and the universe, and how universe does not exist independently from Brahman. This is the theme for this chapter. This is authored, as we all know, chapters 11 to 12, 11 to 15 by the 11th Acharya, Jagadguru Srimad Bharati Tirtha Mahaswamigal. Now, Acharya says, starting from Akasha up to the body, nothing is distinct from Brahman. It arises, this universe is born out of Brahman, it sustains out of Brahman, and merges or dissolves into Brahman. And see, let us take the case of a mud becoming a pot. The mud is the material cause, and the potter is the efficient cause. But for the mud to exist as mud, or as a pot, or go back again as pounded pieces, it is dependent on the nature of the mud and not the potter. Therefore, the subsistence and merger of the pot is never with the potter. It is always with the mud. That is why, and the second truth is also affirmed, that there is no disconnect between the mud and the potter. They are all finally interconnected. Now, to establish this fact, Acharya takes three theories. How is this universe manifest? Whether it manifests as seeming, or changing, or beginning. What do we mean by beginning? World understands beginning as something should be a raw material and something should be processed out of it. Cotton becoming cotton yarn. Cotton yarn becoming fabric. According to the world, there is a change. So that is changing. A beginning. Because it's from one to another. Now, changingness is what they mean is the example of milk becoming curd, mud becoming pot, and gold becoming ornaments. There is, unlike yarn made into a fabric through the process of knitting or any form of processes, here the same material transforms. Milk becoming curd, gold becoming ornament, and mud becoming pot. This they call it as the changingness. Changing. And what is seeming? You see a rope in semi-darkness and assume it to be a snake. The original object does not undergo any change. Nor is there a beginning and a form change later. Therefore, it is neither beginning nor changing but seeming. Vedanta says this universe is a process of seeming. It manifests as a process of seeming and not changing or becoming. And all of us know what is that which makes it manifest, the power of Maya, which is with Brahman. And we have also seen quite some time back, the power and the powerful cannot be disassociated. Power will always be with the powerful. Therefore, what is being said is, 2-3 things are very clearly laid out as far as Brahman is concerned. The supreme power of Brahman is manifold of the nature of activity, knowledge, and strength. 2. Brahman is supreme, all-powerful, eternal, all-full, and secondless. 3. Brahman shines by that power through which it manifests. The power of consciousness of Brahman is seen in all the creations or manifestations or bodies. These are three important tenets because illustrations are going to be given thereafter. What do we mean by power? See, the power of movement in the wind, the hardness in a stone, the fluidity in water, and the burning capacity in a fire. Don't we see them as their power? Can you separate this power from burning from fire? Not possible. Take the case of Akasha, the voidness is its power. The power of destruction in the destructible things, and a seed becoming and sprouting into a huge banyan tree. Is it that the banyan tree is concealed and contained into the seed? How do we see? So this is the power of Maya. A drop of semen shapes into hands, legs, heads, and becomes a human being. Science can explain the process of a growth of an embryo, but it can't create it. So, this is the power of Maya, hardness of a stone. Can it be substituted by anybody with any scientific gadgets or effort? These are all permanent, these are all God created dualities. Likewise, it is said that when sometimes Brahman bears the power of mentation, then he is called the mind. That's why we say mind is Maya. Mind is the power of Maya. And therefore, one has to be very careful in conquering it. First, the mind. After that, the concept of bondage and release. And after that, the creation of universe called the world. This state thus has come to stay. In fact, a very interesting story is narrated in Vedanta as to how we are so easily misled. Like this mother trying to tell a story to her child, who says, "Oh boy, somewhere there were 3 handsome princes. Of them, 2 were not born. Similarly, one did not exist even in the womb. Invested with the virtues, they lived in a town which did not exist at all. They, leaving their own town of void, with clear minds and going elsewhere, saw in the sky trees bearing rich fruits. All those 3 princes are now, O my son, staying in the city to be happily engaged in hunting." And the mother went on spinning more and more about the story. And what happened? The boy tended to believe. Why? Because of gross ignorance and nothing else. And says Vedanta, all of us keep believing this universe and the Maya Jal as this ignorant child believes the story of the mother. So, the creation of samsara, or the phenomenal life, is of the same status as this story told to a child who is devoid of inquiry. Let's continue to. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The discussion proceeds now in trying to explain what do we mean by the potency of Maya. When a fire flame shoots up as a jwali, we find inherently it is because of the burning capacity. Let's take the case of a pot. Its mud which is in an inert form, and it slowly emerges as a pot. And pot is nothing but earth, which has all the five qualities, namely touch, then feel, taste, heat, everything, all the five. Now, the point is, we don't see any of them in the pot. So, Vedanta tries to explain a very, very important, interesting dimension. It says, potency is something which cannot be separated from the powerful. Therefore, it cannot be separated from Brahman. That's one truth which we saw yesterday. Likewise, potency is also not conceivable. It's not visible. Its effects are always known. Therefore, they say, in potency, there is no bigness, nor sound, nor is it conceivable, and therefore it is incapable of description. Hardness in a stone. How do you? We only know that that's the effect when you touch the stone. How do you explain hardness? Because you can't see it. Like Brahman, the potency of Brahman is also not capable of being seen. It can only be felt or experienced. The effect alone can be seen. This is a very, very important aspect. So, all our minds which is devoid of inquiry, we consider the pot to be the potent output. We should not confuse between the potency and the effect of the potency. Pot is only the effect. Therefore, they make it very clear. 2-3 things. Pot is not different from the mud, as it is not seen if separated from the mud. Nor is it not different from it, since pot is not seen at the stage when mud is only in the form of a lump. Therefore, they keep saying potency cannot be explained or seen. But the effect is always born out of potency. In the state of its non-manifestation, we call it potency. In the state of manifestation, it bears the name pot. And gives an example, like Maya is like a magician who cannot be, the magical powers of a magician is not visible. Whereas his magic, the output is always seen. And this output is what Vedanta says we start giving names. A simple gold becomes a bangle, becomes a necklace, becomes an earring. So, the transformation or the effect bears a name. That's the first point Vedanta tries to drive. Potency, when it activates and brings out a result, that result bears a name, bears a form. And we should remember the second point, even though it bears a name and form, both are not real. There are 3 states: the manifest, the unmanifest, and the base. When it manifests as a gold bangle, the name and form are unreal. When it does not manifest, it remains as it is, and Brahman keeps shining. And when its base, which never is always capable of an origin or an end, during these 2 phases of manifestation and unmanifestation. These are the 3 phases of how potency gains name and forms. Now, the problem with us is, assuming the pot is broken and reduced back into shreds of mud, the name and form which it has gained earlier does not disappear from our mind. We are so used to it. We think what is unreal as real. Why do we say it is unreal? Because it can always be destroyed. According to Vedanta, truth is incapable of destruction. That's the benchmark. Anything which is capable of destruction is not truth. It is false. It is mirage. It is unreal. Therefore, the pot which is capable of destruction, having a name and form, is nothing but unreal. And the mind, the name and form doesn't disappear out of our mind even if the pot breaks and it is shredded into mud. That is the nature which we are so used to it. Because ultimately Vedanta says these names and forms keep circulating in this universe because of verbal power, not out of any potential power, because they are capable of destruction. So a question is raised by the logicians. All right, we understand these are unreal. Let's take it, buy it out. But assuming if it is unreal, the moment you realize that a pot is unreal or a gold bangle is unreal, they should disappear. Why are they present? For which Vedanta answers beautifully. It says, you must understand God created duality can never be destructed, but man created duality can always be destructed. So acquire the knowledge that every name and form is unreal. Once you reach the self-realized state, you become indifferent to all of them. Therefore, they don't matter to you at all. Knowledge is different from non-appearance. World will continue to exist for the rest as duality, but for a realized soul, world doesn't exist. It's a mirage. It's a dream. So this understanding is very crucial and critical, says Vedanta. And it gives an example. We go to a pond and see our own face. We see its reflection. We know it is not real. We can't show our love. We can't make it eat. We can't make it sleep. All this we know. Once we know, whenever we see, we know that it's only a reflection. Don't we find that in our daily routines? For a realized soul, universe will look a mirage. Whatever they say, they will say it's a reflection, it's a manifestation of names and forms. All this is nothing but illusion. So, world need not disappear. Now, the last question in this section. They say, all right, yesterday you said manifestation is more in the nature of seemingness. Can you justify it one more time? And they give an example. Yes, it is like a snake appearing on a rope. And that's why they gave 3 examples. For seemingness, it is snake and rope. For changefulness, it is curd and then pot and gold articles. And for the first category, which is beginning, it is yarn becoming cotton, cotton becoming yarn, and yarn becoming cloth. Now, Vedanta justifies very clearly that the life mission, universe does not work like a curd. What is the difference between curd and a pot? A curd, once it becomes a curd, on its destruction, does not restore itself as a milk. Whereas that's not the case with Brahman. It's like a pot. It is like a bangle. You destroy the name and form, you will reach mud. You will reach gold. Likewise, if you destroy the entire universe, you will see the underlying substratum as Brahman. Therefore, it is seeming. Of course, pot and gold is also given as an example for changingness. But the difference, only difference is, it doesn't lose its identity. Restoration is capable, and therefore it is seeming. That's the difference they make between curd, pot, and mud, and gold article. Now, they also say when you can say these two states for mud and pot, why don't you also agree that it is also in the nature of beginning? For which Vedanta says, whenever something is a beginning, it should be either a duplication or should be an increase. It should be a loss of its original identity and the emergence of a new identity and restoration becoming impossible. These things don't figure when it comes to nature, when it comes to universe, and therefore they always remain only seeming. And therefore Vedanta should always be approached as a snake appearing over a rope. Let's continue tomorrow.